another common mistake that students make in the topic of percentage. Now let's look at this question here. Mr. Tan and Mr. Nordin had some fruits. 40% of Mr. Nordin's fruits were oranges and the rest were apples. Now with this information, let's represent it with a ratio so it's easier for us to interpret later on. So for Mr. Nordin, oranges to apples, oranges is 40% and apples is 60%. Okay, because we use 100% to take away the 40%, so that's how we get 60% for the apples. And next sentence we have 80% of Mr. Tan's fruits were oranges and the rest were apples. So let's represent that again. Mr. Tan, oranges to apples, that will be 80% to 800 minus 80%, and that gives us 20% for the apples. Now, so let's look at the first statement that we are given. Mr. Nordin had more apples than oranges. Okay, so let's look at, let's focus on Mr. Nordin. So Mr. Nordin has 60% of apples and 40% of oranges. So it is true that he has more apples than oranges. So the first sentence is correct. Now the next statement we are given, Mr. Tan had 80 oranges. Now we only know that Mr. Tan has 80% of oranges. We don't know if the 80% represents 80 oranges. We do not have enough information to tell that. So for the second statement, it is not possible to tell. And so for the last statement, which states that Mr. Tan has more oranges than Mr. Nordin, will not be possible for us to tell because we do not know how many fruits Mr. Nordin started with and how many fruits Mr. Tan started with. So that's why in this case here, by looking at the percentage, it is not sufficient to help us make the conclusion that Mr. Tan has more oranges than Mr. Nordin. So that's why for the third statement, it is not possible to tell.